So when I was looking for scripture that fits with this, all of the different types of scripture, well, I'll share them with you. This is not on your worksheet. This is Allison's bonus feature. So it's number 0. I found a couple. The first one is Genesis 1:31. It says, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day." Everything that he made, including humans. So your brain is good. Not just like, pizza was good, but like capital G, good. Your brain is an awesome system that works and sends signals all over your body to do amazing and incredible things. In Ephesians, Paul writes to a letter and he says, "Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires." So your brain wants you to do stuff. Eat another slice of cake. It tastes good. It sends yummy chemicals inside your brain, right? Or whatever other impulse. Do this really weird triple backflip, super califragilisticexpialidocious trick on your bike or the trampoline or whatever. Don't worry, it won't hurt you. We'll be fine, I promise, right? Your brain tells you some things like that sometimes. And Paul says, be renewed in the spirit of your minds and put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And then in 2 Corinthians, again, Paul says, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." So what we're going to be talking about today is has a lot to do with the parts of your brain and how they help your body function. And one of the things that psychologists and philosophers and maybe even Dr. MacGyver navigate through is we have that organ inside our body doing stuff. But then we also have this other part of ourself, our mind and our spirit. And it also lives inside your brain. And so we are able then to use some of the features of our brain to help us control some of those thoughts. It's this input cycle that goes over and over and over. Who's controlling who? Are your brain parts, your thoughts and desires that have neurotransmitters that say, eating sugar is good for me. It's tasty. Because all of those neurotransmitters come in and say, yes, please, more. Or is it that prefrontal cortex part of your body that's saying, if I eat 6 pieces of cake tonight, I'm going to feel sick. And my tummy is going to hurt later, even though my brain said, yes, please, I would like some more. So it's that kind of conversation that a lot of people have had, like how do all of those pieces work together? And we're just going to start by naming some of those pieces. Dr. MacGyver, we are so glad to see you. How are you?
Great.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly, and I just want to make sure, who are these brilliant humans?
These are a couple of Pathfinders I asked to help with the presentation.
Well, hello there, and what are your names?
So this is the head thing, I think. My name is Nina. My name is Nora. We are companions in the Brinklow Sky Blazers Club. So here we have a head, go, yeah.
And I'd like them to start by showing you the different parts of the brain.
There's no brain. Have you lost your mind?
Thank you both.
You're welcome.
I thought that would be a fun start to the presentation. Miss Allison, did you want to start with any opening words?
I already have. The floor is yours.
All right. Brain and behavior. We want to start with a primer on anatomy. So we have a video that follows. And this teacher we'll go briefly over the anatomy of the brain, then we'll go in more detail later. So the next slide is this teacher going over the different parts of the brain.
These are real human brains, and they came from individuals who directly consented to donate their body to science after death. The brain is connected to this long tail called your spinal cord. Messages travel up and down the spinal cord at over 250 miles per hour. This is called the dura. It's a connective tissue that surrounds your brain and spinal cord and helps protect your central nervous system. The human brain is divided into two halves, and each half contains 4 lobes. The frontal lobe is responsible for higher level thinking and voluntary movement. The parietal lobe processes sensory information like taste and touch. The occipital lobe is primarily responsible for vision, and the temporal lobe is responsible for processing hearing. This part on the back of the brain is called the cerebellum. The cerebellum helps you stay balanced and also assists in fine motor activity. Finally, teenage brains are not fully developed. The human brain reaches full maturity around age 25. Now you know. Follow for more science videos.
I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal due by 10.
We're managing YouTube.
Did you hear that part about the teenage brain, or any teenagers there?
Do you have any? One hand raised up.
All right, let's go on to the slides that show the different parts of the brain. So can you see my cursor moving? I'm making a circle over the frontal lobe.
No, we can't see it.
Okay. Well, if you look, the frontal lobe is in gold. So that's the part that's right behind your forehead, and functions are personality.
One. Verse 31. Genesis chapter 1. Verse 31. The second one, multiplication. 4. 4, 22 through 20. The last one is 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians, number 3, chapter 10. Verse. I will make sure that we have this available to you. I'm going to throw it back to Dr. McIver. I will make sure that we get it again.
Thank you. The frontal lobe is in gold, and that's the part of the brain right behind your forehead. The temporal lobe is right behind your eye and above your ear. That's in green, or maybe you'd call that sage. The occipital lobe is in gray. The occipital lobe is neat in that you don't really see with your eyes, you see with your brain. Your eyes are like the lens of a camera, where your brain is the digital sensor. So if you fell and hit the back of your head and had a contusion or bruise in your occipital lobe, your eyes might work perfectly fine, but you wouldn't be able to see. That's called cortical blindness. The parietal lobe is a neat area. That's the, would you call that magenta or pink? The parietal lobe controls sensation, so pain, taste, touch, and they're really interesting syndromes that people can have if they have injury to the parietal lobe. One of them is called Gerstmann syndrome, where you can't name the thumb for whatever reason. You can't name the thumb. You can't calculate, so you can't add and subtract, and you can't recognize the name of or the face of your familiar family members. So that's really interesting that the parietal lobe is really involved in helping you pay attention to your surroundings. I didn't mention that the temporal lobe is really important for memory, for getting information into the brain. And it's also important for hearing. This is a true story. There was a church member who had what we call a subdural hematoma, where you have bleeding on the surface of the brain. And he was aphasic, meaning he couldn't get sensory information into his brain. So that part of the brain, the temporal lobe, the sensory input center was injured. And he did recover. And I asked him, what was it like not being able to tell what people were saying or understand what you were reading? And he said he just couldn't hear them. So that's really neat that the brain, even though your ears capture the sound, your brain is responsible for hearing. Now, if you go below the brain, you'll see the cerebellum. That's in back. That's that structure that looks like a walnut. That's really important for coordinating. So taking your finger and touching the tip of a pen, and then taking your finger back and maybe touching your chin. If your cerebellum wasn't working, your movement would be like this instead of straight to the point and back. And then finally, the brain stem is really important. It looks like the stem of a broccoli. And that brain stem, which is the stem, has two parts, the pons and the medulla. The pons has a lot of cranial nerve pathways in it. So your ability to blink, your ability to smile, those nerve command centers are in your pons. The medulla, which is a little lower than the pons, is really important for these basic functions that we take for granted, like being awake, like your blood pressure, these automatic things that you don't have to pay attention to, your breathing. So we are fearfully and wonderfully made. The next slide is a picture of a brain MRI. I labeled it just so you could see and recognize structures. Do you see where I have the forehead demarcated in red?
Yes.
Okay. What part of the brain do you think is right behind the forehead?
Frontal lobe. They're saying frontal lobe.
Absolutely. Excellent. Do you see where I have the nose?
See it? Yeah.
All right, so that's showing you where the front is, and then the opposite side is the back of the head. And look how large the tongue is. So I have tongue exclamation mark. You never knew your tongue was so big, but the tongue is very large. It's a large muscle. The next slide shows you some other structures. The pons that we mentioned, that's the pot belly. If you think of that as a person standing up, the pons is the pot belly. Some say it looks like a hummingbird. So it's the body of the hummingbird. Right beneath the pons is the midbrain. That's where those crucial functions like alertness, like your heartbeat, like your blood pressure, that's where those are housed. And then you transition into the spinal cord. So all of your commands for movement, all of your plans to do things start in your brain, and then they're communicated to your muscles through your spinal cord and then the nerves. And conversely, every sensory input that you feel comes through either your spinal cord or your cranial nerves and then travels up through your spinal cord and your brain stem to be appreciated in the brain. And then again, we see the cerebellum and back and towards the bottom, and that's again needed for fine-tuning movement. The next slide. That slide we just showed you was directly midline. So my head was sectioned right down the middle and open like a book. This slide is just to the left of midline. So you can see that I've labeled the eye. Look at the tooth. Doesn't it look just like a tooth that you see on TV or in diagrams? But they get that from real life. That is really what our teeth look like. And you can ask Dr. Lee, you can ask Dr. Sean's wife for advice on what proper tooth care looks like. Do you see that ruler where you see that 15.3 millimeters?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's actually the tumor that we removed. So this is actually an MRI of a young woman who had a brain tumor. And we're going to show you a surgery, how we removed that tumor. So here's the next one. I drew an outline in red around it and then labeled the different portions of the brain. So what parts of the brain is this tumor closest to?
Yep, they got it.
What did they say?
They said parietal and occipital.
Excellent. So what would you think if this tumor were causing a problem? What do you think would happen to this person? How would they present? What might they tell you if you were the doctor or the nurse interviewing them?
I heard vision issues. Other ideas? Smell issues?
Vision, yes. Sensory input, yes.
Someone said
What did you say?
Someone said taste.
Taste. You know, that's possible. So all of those are possible presentations. She actually presented with headache, and the screening studies showed that she had this tumor. So the next slide is actually a surgical video. And just to tell you how we did this person is asleep. You're looking at the tumor, which is in the middle of the screen, and we're gently separating it from the brain. And you have to be careful because there are normal blood vessels that are around the tumor that you can't disturb. So we're just gently trying to develop the plane between the brain and the tumor. And you can tell the difference. This tumor looks like it's bumpy. It's different colors, white, you see brown, you see purple. So this is a very vascular tumor. And we use these instruments, this instrument that looks like long tweezers with the silver tip, that's the bipolar. So there's an electric current that's driven between the two tips that helps coagulate or close off the blood vessels. And then we can cut them and separate them from the brain. So this is a sucker that helps keep the area clean. And we just gently retract and then develop the plane. And we won't spend too much time on this, but this is really neat. You see the brain is pulsating. Everything pulsates. Everything that's living or every part of your body will pulsate because it fills with blood and then it contracts. It expands and then it contracts as it fills with blood and then as blood leaves the structure. So it's normal for the brain to pulsate, just like your with your heartbeat. If you look at the tip of your finger and really focus, you'll probably see it gently expanding and contracting, expanding and contracting. Even after you've run really hard or really fast and you're trying to catch your breath and you look up, sometimes you'll see your vision kind of distorting along with the heartbeat. So everything fills with blood and then blood leaves the structure. We'll move on. Any questions before we move on from the surgical video?
Question. The gauze that we're seeing, there's strips on them. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, that's called a patty. And you see that we'll use that to maintain separation from the brain and the structure you're trying to remove. The other advantage, not only is it a barrier, but you can touch that with the sucker and the fluid just goes through the patty. It's almost like a sponge. And so if I wanted to remove fluid from the field, but I didn't want to irritate the brain, I'd put a patty down and then I'd touch the patty and suck the fluid away. So I'm less likely to irritate the brain. That was an excellent question. What other questions do you have?
How long did it take for this procedure?
This surgery took about 4 hours. And now that sounds like a long time, but time flies by in the operating room. You're just shocked that it's 3 p.m. when you started the case at 10 a.m. And I think it's because you're really focused on what's in front of you. So it's almost like time has no meaning. It just really flies by. Now, this was one of the more complex cases. This tumor went all the way down to the ventricle. The ventricle is a chamber that holds or contains the spinal fluid. The spinal fluid is actually cerebral spinal fluid. It's produced in the brain. It leaves these chambers in the brain, exits through openings at the base of the brain, and then flows along the spinal cord. So this tumor tracked all the way down to the ventricle, and at the end of surgery, we were actually looking into the ventricle, and we could see the structures that actually produce spinal fluid. What other questions do you have?
Jan, can you hear us?
I can. What was the last thing you heard?
The question was, what causes that kind of tumors?
We don't know. We think she was probably born with it. There are some tumors that are caused by other problems, like smoking or but for this one, we don't know really what caused it.
Yeah, next question. How long would it take to recover?
Excellent question. She was in the hospital about 3 days, and surprisingly, she had no symptoms after surgery. So this was in an area of the brain that she must not have been using. What's neat about the brain is there's a lot of sharing of function. So you can see that we are irritating the brain and removing the tumor, but we didn't cause any problem in doing it. And that's what's fascinating about the body. And you're right. There are times where you operate and then you wonder, how did I affect this person? How will they wake up? Did I hurt them? And sometimes I will actually go and pray and ask God to help this person recover from the surgery. We know that we've done everything we can to help them. We were as careful as we could be, but I'll still pray and ask God to help the person recover. But this person, other than being tired from the anesthesia from surgery, she had no problems.
Wi-Fi is not really working for my laptop.
All right. Sorry, that's me. I didn't realize you could see me. Any other questions that we have? Lydia has one.
So that's like how we solve something tumor.
What happens to the space where the tumor was?
Excellent question. It fills with spinal fluid, cerebral spinal fluid. Now, you can imagine that this tumor pushes the brain away. When you remove a tumor like this, the brain will return to its normal position, but it won't come back perfectly. There's always going to be a space. You'll always be able to see that there was something there, but it'll be gone. So it'll be an empty space, but there are no vacuums. So it will fill with something. So it'll fill with cerebral spinal fluid. This brings up another point. The brain actually floats in cerebral spinal fluid. So that fluid that the brain produces circulates outside the brain, goes outside the spinal cord, and then circulates on the top of the brain and enters through trap doors, one-way valves, back into the bloodstream. So the spinal fluid is produced by the choroid plexus, which is almost like a filtration plant. The blood passes through it, and the choroid plexus produces the spinal fluid, and then the spinal fluid is taken up again into Paconian granulations, these valves that are at the top of the head, and the spinal fluid goes back into the bloodstream and is recycled. Have any of you heard of shunts or hydrocephalus or babies with water on the brain? Have you ever heard of that?
I'm hearing some yeses.
Okay. That's caused by a mismatch between production and uptake of the spinal fluid, or it can't get out of the brain, so you need to divert it. These are excellent questions.
And reminds me to
That's absolutely correct. After you eat Cheetos, do you want Cheetos in your brain? No, you don't want Cheetos in your brain. So that's why those tight junctions in the blood vessels of your brain prevent certain chemicals that are circulating in your bloodstream from getting into your brain cells or getting into the circulation that's dedicated to your brain. And the brain needs a lot of support. There are a lot of neurons, a lot of cells needing energy. So you have to be very careful about what you supply to your brain. And that brings up another question, which we'll ask later in the presentation. And want you to start thinking about it now. How do you guard against things that will hurt you? And just keep that in mind. Oh, another excellent question. The bipolar drives an electric current between the tips, and that causes the water molecules to become steam. It's just like a pot of boiling water. If it gets hot enough, you'll change the phase of the chemical so that the H2O molecule goes from a liquid to a gas. So when you learn things in your science class, there are are usually everyday applications from everything you learn. So really look for common day applications of what you learn, and you'll remember them better. You remember these facts better. Excellent question.
Next question, please.
In this part of the brain, you have more than you'd imagine. There's certain areas that you have a millimeter or two where you're close to pathways for function like movement or speech. So in those cases, when we're close to eloquent cortex, eloquent means you need it for function. If you injure it, you'll notice it. So when we're operating close to eloquent cortex, we'll do one of two things. We'll operate with the patient awake, or we'll use probes to stimulate and look for movement in their limbs. I have a video showing movement-induced stimulation. It was an epilepsy case where we took a probe, we were close to hand function, and we stimulated different parts of the brain, and you could see the person's hand contract and relax while they were asleep. So we'll use either awake surgery or monitoring if we're close to eloquent cortex. If it's speech, you have a speech pathologist in the operating room, and they're quizzing the person, looking for changes in their speech. So if you're close to eloquent cortex, you do change your technique and you monitor either movement, sensation, or speech. Excellent questions. It was one surgeon, but there was a team. The anesthesiologist was the physician. Actually, it was a nurse anesthetist who put the person to sleep, put the patient to sleep. We had a PA who helped irrigate. If you can, I don't know if you'll be able to tell based on the time we have left, but someone is irrigating, letting fluid come down the tip of the bipolar. And so she was doing that. Then there was a surgical technician, someone who hands us the instruments. And then there was a nurse, a circulating nurse, who's in the operating room who gets supplies that we need. So did you see that water going down the bipolar? That was the PA, physician assistant, irrigating down the bipolar. So there are usually at least 4 people in the room helping with the surgery.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Okay. Humans are so interesting. So I
That looks like a neuron.
that's what I was thinking.
And it's a really long neuron.
Yes, it sure is. Here, Ruby, I'm gonna do 2. But it's a cloth diaper. Mr. MacGyver?
I know, reverb. That's some mild shit right there.
Oligodendrocytes.
Yeah. All right, Mark. All right, let me put those on. Hand is representing. And then these fingers right here, there's a little gap of space in between there. So there's space in there, but they're pretty close to touching. We're gonna call that. We've got our dendrites here. That's where things are going. So we've got more. Dendrites going on over here. And then, see, got some more labels. This little long piece, like Amy has right here, we call that an axon, this little long piece. And some are really long, like Dr. McIver said, ours are really long. And some are really short, depending on where they go. Like, think about your whole spine going all the way down, like to your toe is going to be a longer axon than others. And then these parts right here is myelin or myelin sheath, sometimes it's called myelination. That part is like an insulation. So we want to send a signal that goes all the way down here. It's kind of like having it insulated, just like an electrical current when you have a plug and a wire that has that plastic around it. It lets all the electricity know to go one direction rather than go everywhere. So it's keeping in there. And then if we consider this a little message that we wanted to send, it would go from this little dendrite and it would get caught up in here and then be sent the message. Another way that they send messages are through electrical impulses or sometimes neurotransmitters too, which are different types of chemicals that get sent along the way. So it can go all the way through Ruby's axon terminal and then keep it connected all the way there. So you have those nerves going all over your body sending different messages. There's different types of nerve cells too. This is the basic structure for what happens.
You got it all.
All right.